This week on Vaticano, we travel with Pope Francis to the World Council of Churches in Geneva that this year celebrates 60 years since its foundation. Visit the war-torn city of Mosul with us and experience how Christian families lead their lives today, 1 year after ISIS fled the region. Meet the Palestinian ambassador to the Holy See, Issa Kassissieh, and learn about diplomatic relations between the Holy See and Palestine. For this and more, Vaticano starts now.
Rome, Italy, Fiumicino Airport, shortly before 9 a.m. on Thursday, June 21st. The papal airplane, with Pope Francis and many journalists on board, takes off. Destination, Geneva, Switzerland, historically known as the Protestant Rome, for its links to John Calvin. The purpose of this quick one-day trip? Pope Francis's visit to the WCC, World Council of Churches, 70th anniversary. This meeting also marked 50 years of cooperation between the World Council of Churches and the Roman Catholic Church in the quest for Christian unity. The theme of the visit was walking, praying and working together, and it started with a prayer service at the Ecumenical Center Chapel. We met with the Apostolic Nuncio to Switzerland, asking him why it took 14 years between the last papal visit and this one.
I suppose it's a legitimate question, but I happened to come across during the preparation for the papal visit an article that was written that makes mention of the fact that between the first visit that Pope St. John Paul II made to Switzerland and the second visit, 20 years passed. In other words, actually Pope Francis's visit, in terms of a papal visit, comes sooner than the delay between the two visits that Pope St. John Paul II made.
And isn't this also an ecumenical pilgrimage, not so much a state visit?
Well, the term state visit hasn't really much relevance when it comes to the Holy Father. It's normally said that wherever he goes for pastoral reasons. He goes as a shepherd, he goes as a father, he goes to meet his own Catholic people, but also other men and women of goodwill. In this case, I think that the starting point or the outgoing, let's say, push kind of to make this visit possible was an invitation on the part of the World Council of Churches to come and help them celebrate the 70th anniversary of their existence. And the Holy Father was more than happy to accept that invitation.
Among the Swiss president, other officials, cardinals and bishops, the nuncio to Switzerland, Archbishop Gollickson, and also the nuncio to the United Nations, Archbishop Jurkovic, welcomed Pope Francis at the airport. What is the difference between an apostolic nuncio to a country like Switzerland here, or to an organization like the United Nations in Geneva, for example?
Basically, I'd say that as of the last 10 years or so, both have the same dignity. In other words, the title Apostolic Nuncio is a personal title, just like in many countries, the title of ambassador is a personal title. Basically speaking, it's just a difference in the job description. My relations are with the country and with the church here in the country, whereas his are with an international organization or many international organizations.
The Holy See is not a member of the WCC, but is an observer and often sends a representative to its meetings, which aim to foster unity between Christians of different denominations. So do you think that the papal visit to Geneva could have an impact on the Catholic Church in Switzerland?
Well, we hope that anything like that would be a positive sort of thing. But of course, we're always talking about intangibles. And so when we're talking about intangibles, I can be free, I can say anything I want, and in some way or another, no one can call me to account. It's not as if, because the Holy Father comes, then all of a sudden this, that, or the other concrete thing is going to change. They're going to reorganize the dioceses, they're going to open a new church or something else here or there. Basically speaking, the hope would always be that in some way or another, Catholics and other people in Switzerland would gain a certain or better understanding, perhaps, of our faith and of the role of the Holy Father in terms of drawing the whole church together in bonds of love.
Pope Francis ended his one-day visit by celebrating a Mass in this massive hangar at the airport, which hosts the Geneva International Motor Show every year and is the size of 6 football pitches. The organizers said 37,000 worshippers had attended. After Mass, Pope Francis flew back to Rome. He described the day as an encounter and went on to say that when one person encounters another and feels appreciation for the meeting, this always touches the heart.
You know, it was my first papal flight, so a lot of my colleagues had been on many, many trips with the Holy Father. This was my first. I didn't know exactly what to expect because a lot of people tell you, but then when you're there, it's all new. You know, it was an amazing experience. The Pope arrived, he landed in Geneva, and there were Swiss guards to welcome him, as well as the Swiss government and the Swiss ambassador to the Holy See. And it was a beautiful ceremony, and it was rather emotional. This was an ecumenical pilgrimage for the Pope, and he emphasized greatly, if you want, we should look at what unites us Christians, Catholics and non-Catholics, as opposed to looking at what divides us. And if you think back over the centuries, how very much has divided us, even violently, even shedding bloodshed. It's quite touching, if you want, and quite interesting that today the Pope chose to go all the way to Geneva just for 10 hours, but to focus completely and utterly on this World Council of Churches, which is celebrating its 70th anniversary. It was set up in Amsterdam in 1948 at a time that the war had just ended, the Second World War, and so much has happened over these years, and so much has actually brought the Catholic Church closer, much closer to the Christians, which include Orthodox, Anglicans, Baptists, Lutherans, Methodists.
La divisione, infatti, si oppone apertamente alla volontà di Cristo.
Our lack of unity is in fact openly contrary to the will of Christ, but is also a scandal to the world and harms the most holy of causes, the preaching of the gospel to every creature. The Lord asks us for unity. Our world, torn by all too many divisions that affect the most vulnerable, begs for unity.
Che colpiscono soprattutto I più deboli, invoca unità.
Rather unexpectedly, 4 North Korean and 4 South Korean Protestants met the Pope when he arrived at the World Council of Churches headquarters. And this was unexpected, but it very much reflects perhaps a repercussion of the negotiations or the talks that have taken place between the Trump administration and North Korea very recently. But it's a reflection, if you want, of the WCC's efforts over these decades to promote peace and justice in many parts of the world, from South Africa to Asia to various countries where there are conflicts. The Pope then arrived for the big event, which included over 40,000 faithful, and it was at a big area called the Palais Expo inside Geneva. And it was incredible because he arrived on his Pope Mobile, and it had been created for an area of worship. They had put a beautiful designed altar area. There were sort of designs of mountains on the back, and there were real olive trees decorating it. There was a crucifix lit by LED lights, and everyone went wild when he drove in, and we did our actual live shot from there, and the atmosphere was very electric as well as spiritually very, very powerful.
Perdonarci tra noi, riscoprirci fratelli.
Forgiving one another, rediscovering after centuries of disagreements and conflicts that we are brothers and sisters. How good this has done us and continues to do. The Father is pleased when we love one another and we forgive each other from the heart.
Di vero cuore.
And what touched me was that the Holy Father, he said a few words on the way out towards Geneva with his microphone, telling us that he wished us, to a good day, and I hope that your work will go well. And then he came and he greeted every single member of the Vatican press corps. Now that's quite a lot of us. And I was very touched by how he took the time to talk to everyone. Some people asked him to pray perhaps for a sick relative. Some people gave him maybe books that they've published about him, and they gave them. Somebody gave him a soft toy of a St. Bernard dog, very symbolic of Switzerland. And I have to be honest, I gave him something, and it was 2 drawings that my children had made for the Pope, my 6-year-old son, and it said, "Dear Pope, I love you very much." And my 11-year-old daughter said, "I hope you enjoy you're visiting my country, and I'm praying for you as much as you're praying for me, because I'm half Swiss, so my children are also Swiss." So what was unexpected was just seeing for the first time this amazing bringing together of press and Holy Father, and everyone was so in awe.
In a few moments, we'll be back with more on Vaticano. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
We're in a pretty scary place with Al-Qaeda disavowing people for their violence. Iraq on the verge of total collapse as terrorists capture city after city. A Sunni Muslim jihadist group had formed a year ago, pledging to bring arms across Iraq, Syria, and they have strongholds in significant parts of northern Syria, Over the weekend, last weekend, for 4 days, we went back to the northern part of Iraq to really see what the progress has been over the past year. It depends who you talk to. Some will say that ISIS is gone and they're gone forever. In a sense, that's true, because even the Muslims don't want them back. They cause them so much suffering that they don't want them back. It's quite clear, though, that there are ISIS members still around. They're just very hidden. And we saw evidence of atrocities there, nooses still hanging from the roofs, and we saw blood-stained floors in rooms and shaved beards where they'd shaved off their beards to avoid capture. And there are thousands of ISIS fighters, dead ISIS fighters around the town, under the rubble. So it's a pretty horrific situation, a pretty horrific scene, and not something I've certainly ever seen before in my life. The other problem now is other Islamists taking their place, and you have that in some towns like Bartella, where you have what's called the Shabak people, who are a Shia, predominantly Shia group. They're not as obviously as violent as ISIS, but they are quite repressive, and they're concerned that they will basically limit religious freedom for Christians in Bartella in the same way, less violently, but in the same way as ISIS did. We were the first Catholic news agency to get into Mosul. I went with a priest, English priest who helps persecuted Christians, Father Benedict Keeley. We wanted to see really how the Christians are coping, how they're doing, how they're encouraged by what they're seeing in terms of reconstruction, and whether there's any real will to remain in Iraq, or whether they continue to want to leave.
And this is your parents' house?
Yeah, my parents' house and my brother's house. The other one. On the side of my house also. When we came here for the first time, we went into the cellar and we go out. This next day when we returned, my brother went and he saw a bomb in the cellar.
I think the biggest thing has been there's been quite a bit of reconstruction over the past year. They've been helped by what's called the Nineveh Reconstruction Committee, which is a conglomeration of church leaders and NGOs working to really try to restore both the churches, the houses, and to encourage Christians to come back to the villages, to the towns, the Christian towns in Iraq. That's been quite successful. There seems to be quite a lot of progress in terms of encouraging Christians to come back. In Tel Askov, for example, a town in the north, there were, I think, nearly over 60% of Christians have come back. That was less damaged by ISIS. In the towns that were more damaged, like Karakosh and Karmelesh, the return has been slower, but at the same time they are coming back, and churches are being reconstructed and houses are being repaired. One thing we often heard was disappointment in President Trump. They had great hopes for him last year. They were really hoping that he would pull through. They saw him as a strong leader. They like strong leaders in Iraq, and they thought that he was really going to give them the help that they needed. He promised to prioritize the help persecuted Christians. There are various new challenges that they're facing. The primary one is the economy and jobs. What they need are jobs as well as security. Security was the primary concern last time we went. This time it's jobs. I spoke to Archbishop Bashar Wada of Erbil. He told me that the priority is not just surviving, it's thriving. What they really want to do is to thrive now in Iraq so that they stay there, so that they don't leave, especially the young people, so that they actually have a future and they want to stay.
In a few moments, we'll be back with more on Vaticano. More on Vaticano begins now. The Holy See has maintained relations with the Palestinians since before the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. However, diplomatic ties were officially established last year when Pope Francis welcomed the decision of the Palestinian government to open an embassy at the Vatican. We met with the Palestinian ambassador, Issa Kassissieh, to discuss the future course of diplomatic relations with the Holy See.
Your Excellency, Issa Kassissieh, Palestinian ambassador to the Holy See, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Juliet, for giving me the opportunity to be here in our embassy, the Palestinian embassy to the Holy See.
Thank you. Ambassador, you are a member of the Greek Orthodox community of Jerusalem. Your wife is Catholic. How strong is your Catholic faith? How much does Christianity mean to you? How strong are you in your Catholic faith, in your Christian faith?
Well, I'm Jerusalemite. I'm from the old city of Jerusalem. I'm from a rooted Palestinian Christian family. And there in the Holy Land, in the Holy City, we more talk about our identity as a national identity, first Palestinian, then Christian. When it comes to denominations, we all say that we are all good Christians. But definitely, you know, me being as a Greek Orthodox member in Jerusalem, I helped and I could help more in bridging and getting, you know, the two churches, the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, closer to each other.
You have talked in the past about how you want to highlight the role of Palestinian Christians in emphasizing abroad, if you want, the image of Palestine. How are you doing that?
Our message is always about the message of peace, message of justice and peace. As Palestinian Christians, we yearn for a durable and comprehensive peace, as we are people under oppression, under occupation. We suffer, and we are struggling for our national rights. We are struggling for our dignity. We are struggling for our freedom, and we are struggling for coexistence between us and our Israeli neighbors. Our focus is all about reaching to the end game, reaching to peace within the frame of the international legitimacy, international resolutions.
You've been ambassador for almost 5 years to the Holy See now. These have been very tumultuous years in the Middle East. What role do you think the Holy See can play in trying to broker peace in your region?
To be frank with you, with His Holiness Pope Francis, he did a lot. We have to keep in mind that His Holiness visited the Holy Land back in May 2014, and there in Bethlehem, he stood before the wall, and that was an iconic picture. And he meant, to tell everybody that here in the Holy Land, we don't need, wars, we need bridges. And since then, he is working towards this direction. And after that, after 8 days of his visit, he invited President Abbas, and he invited the late President Peres to Rome. There, together, we had a peace prayer, and that was also another big message by His Holiness for the Israelis, Palestinians, and for the 3 monotheistic religions. And by his message, he made a point that the 3 monotheistic religions can live together in harmony through mutual respect. And of course, Pope Francis canonized 2 of our sisters, Mary Alphonsine and Mariam Bawardi. That was a very special moment for us. That was a message also of hope. We are the land of saints. That was his message.
President Trump very recently decided to declare that the United States recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. What effect has that had on your leadership and on your people?
Well, Juliet, it's sad, very negative. And since then, I think we had more than 140 Palestinian kids were killed, more than 14,000 Palestinians were injured. The situation is so deteriorating. People lost their hope. I want to quote his Beatitude, Patriarch Michel Sabbah, where he said, Palestine is not America. Palestine, the Holy Land, is Jerusalem, and we are Jerusalemite. And this is a message, unfortunately, Trump and his entourage used wrongly religious arguments, to justify their illegal unilateral steps and action, and even against all the previous American administrations.
Ambassador, no one would have expected that just a couple of days ago, President Trump would have shaken hands with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Who knows? Perhaps, against your expectations, perhaps President Trump will do something and he'll manage to broker a peace deal with Israel between you.
Everything is possible. But can I tell you something? The moment President Trump tweet that Jerusalem is off the table, that he cut the funding for the refugees, also making a point that the refugee issue, the right of return, is off the table. So this is a non-starter at all, and no Palestinian leader or anyone would accept, to remove Jerusalem from the table. And Jerusalem is an issue for the final status. It's between the 2 sides, and it should be what we call it the capital or the center the center for the three monotheistic religions. If we reach to this point, then I can assure you that Jerusalem will be the warm sun of the Middle East, if not in the world. We're so tired. I'm so worried about my children. I suffered the occupation, and I suffer. And I'm humanized in the checkpoints in front of the wall. I don't want to see my son facing the same problem, and the same for the Israelis.
If there's one thing you would ask for Pope Francis to do for your people, yes, what would it be? What can he do to help?
We hope from him that he speaks out more vocal when it comes to Jerusalem. And I tell His Holiness that Jerusalem must not be exclusive for one side at the expense of others. In the Holy Land, we Christians, our numbers are dwindling. The issue is very serious, and with such unilateral exclusive policies, I think in a very near future you don't see the living stones, and then here and there you cannot talk about Christianities. You see immigration by Palestinian Christians because of this very difficult political economic situation. Something should be done to rescue the situation seriously. He gave strong statements lately, asking to maintain the status quo, refusing President Trump actions and steps. But we expect from him to be more vocal when it comes to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is all ours.
Ambassador Issa Kassissieh, Palestinian ambassador to the Holy See, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you, Juliet, so much, being here and giving the opportunity for me to hear my voice as a Palestinian ambassador to the Holy See.
Thank you.